"Grandpa, we have to leave now." My youngest daughter, Emma, ran up from the cellar, her small face completely drained of color. She was only 7 years old, but the pure terror in her eyes belonged to someone much older. She grabbed my father's hand, her voice dropping to a frantic whisper. "Pack a bag, we need to leave now, don't call anyone." I sat beside them, absolutely speechless. The book I had been reading slipped from my lap. "Emma, what's going on?" I asked, reaching for her shoulder. She looked at me, her entire body trembling, and said, "Please, Dad. Just trust me." 20 minutes later, as we sped down the dark mountain highway away from our family estate, my phone started ringing incessantly. The screen lit up the dark cab of my truck. My eldest daughter's name, Vesper, appeared over and over again. But I didn't dare answer. I was forced to make a choice, and that was the exact moment I realized something terrible, something unimaginable, was about to happen. Whatever awaited us back in that house could tear our family apart forever in a single night. If betrayal has ever touched your family, you're not alone in this room. What I'm about to share is a narrative of greed, deception, and the terrifying reality of what happens when the people you love most decide your life is worth less than the money in your bank account. The hospital machines beeped steadily, a rhythmic, mechanical sound I'd grown to hate over the past 12 hours. My father, Oswald Holloway, lay unconscious. Tubes ran from his arm to the IV pole, and monitors tracked every shallow beat of his failing heart. Beside me, Emma colored quietly in her notebook, trying to stay brave. Every few minutes, she'd look up at him, her small face tight with a worry no child should have to carry. "Dad," she whispered, tugging gently on my sleeve, "why does Grandpa have all those wires?" "They help the doctors keep him safe, sweetheart," I replied, smoothing her hair. "Is he going to be okay?" I didn't know how to answer that. I stood up and walked to the window, watching the lights of Millbrook flicker in the valley below. It was March in Colorado, which meant the winter snow still clung stubbornly to the peaks. But spring was fighting its way through the frost. My father had always loved this season. He used to say the lake looked like a sheet of dark glass in the mornings, perfect for rowing. Now, looking at his frail form tangled in hospital linens, I wasn't sure he'd ever row again. Dr. Brennan, our family physician for 20 years, had used clinical, terrifying words like acute cardiac episode and significant irregularities. But it was the look in his eyes that had stayed with me. The one that said he didn't quite understand what was happening to a man who, until very recently, had the constitution of an ox. Neither did I, not yet, but staring at my father's unconscious form, I felt a cold knot settle deep in my gut. A quiet whisper of instinct I'd been actively ignoring for weeks. It had all started 2 months earlier, with a phone call in late January. I had been in my study reviewing some consulting contracts when my phone buzzed. The name on the screen made me freeze. Vesper, my oldest daughter, the one I hadn't spoken to in 3 painful years. When I answered, she didn't ask how I was. She didn't apologize for the long silence, the stolen money, or the burned bridges. She just said, "Dad, I'm coming home. I want to see Grandpa." I should have asked why. I should have demanded an explanation. But part of me, the foolish, hopeful part that still remembered her as a little girl in pigtails, wanted to believe she had finally grown up. I wanted to believe she was coming back because she missed her family. I was a fool. She arrived 2 days later at the Holloway estate, a sprawling, beautiful Victorian house sitting on 2 acres of prime real estate overlooking Lake Thornton. 4 generations of our family had lived in this house. My father had built his shipping logistics business from absolutely nothing, and this house was his monument to a lifetime of hard work, sweat, and uncompromising integrity. Vesper stood on the wide wrap-around porch, older and noticeably thinner than I remembered, but she was smiling. She hugged me tight, and for a fleeting second it felt incredibly real. Emma watched from the doorway, quiet and uncertain, hiding half her body behind the doorframe. She had been 3 years old, the last time she'd seen her older sister. Now she barely remembered her at all. "Emma, come say hi to Vesper," I urged gently. Emma stepped forward slowly. Shy hi, Vesper crouched down, flashing a brilliant smile. "Look at you, you're so big now." But Emma didn't smile back, she just nodded, her eyes guarded, and quickly retreated to my side. Children always know. They sense the things adults are too polite or too desperate to see. That night at dinner, my father was overjoyed. He hadn't seen Vesper since she had skipped town after borrowing $50,000 she never repaid. But Oswald being Oswald, he didn't bring any of that up. He just smiled, asked questions about her life, and told her repeatedly how much he had missed her. Vesper played her part flawlessly. She laughed at his jokes, complimented Lily's cooking, and asked attentive questions about his health. But as we were clearing the plates, the mask slipped just a fraction of an inch. "Grandpa, you look a bit tired lately," she said casually, wiping her mouth with a napkin. "Have you thought about updating your will? You know, just in case?" The dining room went dead quiet. My father chuckled, waving his hand dismissively. "I'm not going anywhere yet, sweetheart. But yes, everything's in perfect order. Split right down the middle between your father and you. 50-50. Vesper nodded slowly, her eyes tracking the movement of her wine glass. 12 million, right? That's what the estate's worth these days? My jaw tightened so hard my teeth ached. My father didn't notice the crassness of the question. He was too busy beaming at having his family back together. But I noticed. I noticed the rapid, cold calculation in her eyes. I noticed the way she leaned forward a little too eagerly. Something in her smile was entirely hollow. Later that night, as I was tucking Emma into bed, she looked up at me. "Dad, why did Vesper ask about Grandpa's money?" "She's just making sure Grandpa is taking care of things, honey. It's adult stuff." Emma frowned, pulling her blanket up to her chin. She looked at Grandpa funny. "What do you mean?" "I don't know, just funny, like he wasn't really there." I brushed it off, telling her to get some sleep, but her words anchored themselves in my mind. Over the next few weeks, Vesper became a permanent fixture at the estate. She visited daily, bringing my father tea, sitting with him in the sunroom to read the paper, taking slow walks with him around the property. He loved the attention. He told me constantly how grateful he was that she had finally come home. And then he started getting sick. It was subtle at first, chronic fatigue, bouts of severe dizziness, a racing heartbeat that came out of nowhere and left him gasping for air. I insisted he see Dr. Brennan. Brennan ran a full panel of tests and simply shrugged his shoulders. "Stress Adrian. He's 82 years old. His body is naturally slowing down." But my father had always been fiercely strong. He used the rowing machine every morning and worked in his wood shop every afternoon. He hadn't slowed down a bit until Vesper came back into our lives. One evening, Vesper caught me in the foyer as I was bringing in the mail. "Dad, I know you're worried about Grandpa. Let me help. I can move back into my old room. Keep an eye on him. Make sure he takes his meds on time so you don't have to worry." Every instinct I possessed screamed at me to say no. But I wanted to believe my daughter had come home to heal our family. So I said yes. 3 weeks later, I got the terrifying phone call. My father had collapsed in the hallway. Paramedics were rushing him to Millbrook General. By the time I sprinted into the emergency room, he was stabilized but completely unresponsive. Dr. Brennan met me in the harsh fluorescent glare of the hallway, his face uncharacteristically tight. "Adrian, we need to talk privately." We stepped into a small, windowless consultation room. Brennan closed the heavy wooden door until it clicked shut. "Your father's symptoms don't match his medication history." I stared at him, the buzzing of the hospital fading into the background. "What exactly does that mean, Marcus?" "It means his heart shouldn't be reacting this way. Not with the specific beta blockers he's prescribed. Either something environmental is severely interfering with his meds, or..." He trailed off, looking deeply uncomfortable, "or someone is giving him something else." I finished the sentence for him. I walked back to my father's room in a total daze. Vesper was already there, sitting beside his bed, gripping his limp hand. Her eyes were red, her makeup slightly smeared as if she'd been weeping for hours. She looked up quickly when I entered. "Dad, is he going to be okay?" Emma stood silently by the door, watching her older sister with those quiet, piercing eyes. I desperately wanted to believe the raw concern in Vesper's voice. I wanted to believe her tears were genuine, but all my mind could replay was how she had zeroed in on the will, how my father's ironclad health had completely nosedived the exact moment she moved in, and how Emma had said she looked at Grandpa funny. I stood there, watching Vesper stroke my father's hand, and that cold whisper in my gut transformed into a deafening scream. Something was terribly, horribly wrong in my house. I left the hospital as dawn broke over the jagged peaks of the Rockies. I didn't sleep, I couldn't, because somewhere between the rhythmic beeping of the life support machines and Vesper's perfectly timed tears, I had made a firm decision. I was going to find out exactly what was happening to my father. And the very next morning, I found the evidence that shattered my world. Instead of collapsing into bed, I sat in my dark study, staring blankly at the wall. My father's face kept flashing through my mind. By the time the sun cleared the peaks and painted the lake in a brilliant, fiery gold, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for doctors to guess. My father's master bedroom sat at the east end of the house, overlooking the water. I hadn't been in there since the ambulance had taken him away. Stepping inside felt violating, like trespassing in a sanctuary. The bed was still unmade. His reading glasses sat neatly on the nightstand beside a worn, dog-eared copy of Lonesome Dove. The familiar scent of his sandalwood cologne lingered faintly in the air. I moved straight to the en-suite bathroom. The vintage medicine cabinet hung above the sink. I opened it slowly, the hinges creaking in the silence. Rows of amber prescription bottles lined the glass shelves. Blood pressure medication, cholesterol pills, baby aspirin. And there on the second shelf, the one that mattered most, metoprolol for his heart. I picked up the bottle and turned it over in my hands. The label looked perfectly normal. Prescription filled 6 weeks ago at Millbrook Pharmacy. Dr. Brennan's name printed neatly at the bottom, but something felt instinctively wrong. I unscrewed the child-proof cap and poured a handful of the pills into my palm. Small, white, round tablets. They looked like they always did, except I walked over to the window, holding them up to the harsh morning light, and squinted. The color wasn't uniform. Most were stark white, but a few had a very faint, almost imperceptible yellowish tint. You would never notice it, unless you were explicitly looking for a discrepancy. My heart started pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I grabbed my phone and dialed Dr. Brennan. He answered on the third ring, his voice thick and groggy with sleep. "Adrian, it's 7 in the morning. I need to see you today. Marcus." Right now there was a heavy pause on the line. The sleep instantly vanished from his voice. "What did you find?" "I'm not sure yet, but I need you to test something." An hour later, I was sitting in Brennan's private office in Denver. He met me at the door, ushered me inside, and locked it behind us. I handed him the amber bottle without a word. He studied the printed label first, his brow furrowing, then poured the pills onto his polished mahogany desk. He didn't say anything, but I saw the muscles in his jaw tighten. He pulled a small, professional chemical testing kit from his bottom drawer. Using a scalpel, he crushed one of the yellowish pills into a fine powder, added a few drops of a clear reagent solution, and watched the chemical reaction. The silence in the room stretched like a wire pulled to the breaking point. Finally, Brennan looked up. His face was grim, his skin a shade paler. "This isn't metoprolol, Adrian." I felt the floor physically shift beneath my feet. "What is it?" "Pseudoephedrine. It's a heavy decongestant, a stimulant." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process the information. A stimulant, for a man with his heart condition. This is basically poison to his system, Adrian. It would trigger severe arrhythmia, massive hypertension, and eventually, a massive heart attack. He set the testing vial down with deliberate care. Someone switched his medication deliberately. The word hung in the sterile air of the office like an executioner's axe. Deliberately, not a manufacturing accident, not a sloppy pharmacy error, deliberately. My hands started shaking so violently I had to grip the armrests of my chair. Who would do that?" Brennan's voice was gentle, but his eyes were hard and unyielding. "Who has access to his daily medication?" I didn't want to answer, because saying the words aloud would make the nightmare completely real. "3 people, I said finally, my throat bone dry. "Me, Lily, our housekeeper who has been with us for 20 years. "And Vesper." Brennan nodded slowly, leaning back in his chair. "Have you noticed anything unusual since she returned?" I thought about the way Vesper had appraised the house on her first day back. The way she had immediately asked about the $12 million will. The way my father's health had completely nosedived the exact moment she started playing nurse. I desperately wanted to be wrong. I wanted to be a paranoid, cynical old man. But the crushed pills on Brennan's desk didn't lie. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice barely a rasp. "You need more evidence, Adrian," Brennan said firmly. "This is incredibly serious. If someone is intentionally trying to induce a fatal heart attack, you need to build a case. Solid, undeniable, and bulletproof. How? Start with her financials. People don't do this for fun. They do it for a reason. Usually. That reason is money." I stood up, pocketing the remaining pills. "I need to make a call." I dialed Harlan Pierce, the ruthless corporate attorney who had handled our family's legal work for 3 decades. "Harlan, it's Adrian. I need you to look into something for me immediately." "Sure, Adrian, what's up?" "Financial records, my daughter, debts, hidden accounts, outstanding loans, anything unusual." Tear her life apart on paper. There was a stunned pause. "Adrian, what the hell is going on?" "I can't explain right now. Just please. I need this done yesterday. I'll get my best investigators on it. I'll call you when I have something." The drive back to Millbrook felt like navigating through a suffocating nightmare. I kept replaying Brennan's words. Deliberately, someone switched his medication. I wanted to believe there was some other explanation. A mix-up, a bizarre coincidence, but deep down in the darkest part of my soul, I knew the absolute truth. My own flesh and blood was slowly, methodically trying to kill my father. I just didn't know the exact motive yet. By the time I pulled into the estate's long, winding driveway, the sun was sinking behind the Rockies, casting long, bloody shadows across the snow. The house looked perfectly peaceful, but as I parked the truck and stepped out into the freezing air, I heard voices. Laughter, coming from inside my home. I walked up the porch steps, pushed open the heavy oak front door, and froze dead in my tracks. Vesper stood in the grand foyer. Her arm was looped intimately through the arm of a man I had never seen before in my life. He was tall, mid-30s, wearing an expensive tailored suit and an easy, practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. She saw me and her face lit up. "Dad, you're home. I want you to meet someone." The man extended a manicured hand. "Mr. Holloway, I'm Malcolm Reed. It is an absolute pleasure." I shook his hand mechanically, my mind racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Who was this guy? Where had he come from? Vesper beamed, clutching his bicep. "Malcolm's been helping me get back on my feet in the city. He's amazing, Dad. I invited him to stay with us for a while. I can't wait for you to get to know him." I looked at her, at the manic brightness in her eyes, at the way she clung to Malcolm's arm like a lifeline. And suddenly, the puzzle pieces violently snapped together. She wasn't doing this alone. I excused myself to my study, pretending I had urgent legal briefs to read. The words on the page blurred together into meaningless ink. My mind was entirely consumed with the man standing in my foyer. Every instinct I had honed over 30 years of cutthroat corporate law screamed that Malcolm Reed was incredibly dangerous. Dinner that night was a masterclass in psychological torture. Lily had prepared roasted chicken, my father's favorite. Malcolm sat across from me. Vesper at his side, he made himself completely comfortable, slouching slightly, one arm draped casually over the back of Vesper's chair. He was confident, too confident, for a man meeting his girlfriend's wealthy father for the first time. "This is an incredible property, Mr. Holloway," Malcolm said, swirling his expensive red wine. "Vesper told me about this place, but seeing it in person, it's stunning. You're sitting on a gold mine with this lakefront acreage." The words hung naked and obvious in the air. "It's our home," I said coldly. Malcolm leaned forward, unbothered by my tone. "Vesper mentioned your father isn't doing well. Heart trouble, right? I actually worked in high-level pharmaceutical sales for years. If you ever want me to take a look at his prescriptions, make sure everything's optimized, I'd be happy to help. Sometimes these country doctors prescribe combinations that don't play well together." There it was, the offer delivered with a concerned, charming smile. But all I heard was a man with deep knowledge of medications actively volunteering to get his hands on my father's pills. My grip tightened on my fork until my knuckles turned white. "That's very thoughtful, Malcolm, but Dr. Brennan has been our physician for 20 years. I trust him implicitly." "Oh, absolutely. Just offering." He sat back, completely unruffled. The rest of the meal dragged on. Malcolm dominated the conversation, asking rapid-fire questions that felt less like polite curiosity and more like a tactical reconnaissance mission. How long had my father been widowed? Did he have offshore assets? Had the will been updated recently to avoid massive probate taxes? I answered in vague, non-committal terms, giving him absolutely nothing, and I watched. I watched the way Malcolm's charm was a carefully rehearsed performance. I watched the way Vesper kept nervously glancing at him, waiting for his silent approval. This wasn't love. This was a hostile corporate takeover disguised as a romance. When dinner ended, I went upstairs, claiming exhaustion. But instead of going to bed, I stood by the second-floor hallway window that overlooked the side yard, hiding in the shadows. 10 minutes later, the back door opened. Vesper and Malcolm stepped outside into the freezing night air. They stood close, but their body language was entirely wrong. It was tense, urgent. Vesper reached into her heavy winter jacket and pulled out a thick white envelope. She handed it to Malcolm. He tore it open and thumbed through the contents. Even from 20 feet up, the security light caught the green edges of $100 bills. Stacks of them cash. Malcolm counted it rapidly, folded the envelope, and slipped it into his tailored coat pocket. He said something harsh to her. Vesper nodded quickly, wrapping her arms around herself, looking terrified. I pulled out my phone, zoomed in the camera, and took 3 high-resolution photos. I called Harlan Pierce immediately. "Adrian, twice in one day, you're keeping me busy. I have a name for you to investigate. Malcolm Reed. I want everything. Background, employment history, deep financials, criminal records. Find out exactly who this son of a bitch is, your daughter's new boyfriend." Harlan asked, his tone shifting to serious. "I think he's helping her." "Helping her do what, Adrian?" I closed my eyes, leaning my forehead against the cold glass of the window. "I'll explain when I have the proof. Just find out who he is." The next morning, my father was discharged from the hospital. Dr. Brennan called to say his vitals had stabilized enough to go home. I drove him back, my mind racing with how to protect him in his own house. When we arrived, Vesper was waiting on the porch, playing the role of the frantically worried granddaughter to absolute perfection. She threw her arms around him, burying her face in his shoulder. Malcolm stood behind her, offering his practiced, hollow smile. By noon, Vesper and Malcolm announced they were heading into town to run errands. The second their car disappeared down the driveway, I made a call to a man named T.J. Morrison. T.J. was an ex-military security specialist I had used during high-stakes corporate espionage cases. "T.J., it's Adrian Holloway. I need a major favor today right now. What do you need, Mr. Holloway?" 6 micro cameras, hidden feeds, synced to a highly secured encrypted laptop. "Can you get here in an hour?" He didn't ask questions. He showed up in an unmarked van with a young tech named Sam. They worked with terrifying speed and precision. A camera tucked into the smoke detector in Oswald's bedroom. One in the air vent above the master bathroom medicine cabinet. One inside the kitchen microwave vent hood. One in the wine cellar, disguised as a rusted coat hook. One at the front gate, and one in the boathouse, positioned under the eaves. "Motion activated, encrypted to the teeth," Sam explained, handing me a sleek black laptop. "You've got a massive hard drive. It'll store about 2 weeks of continuous HD footage before it starts looping." They were gone before Vesper and Malcolm returned. For the next 3 days, I lived a double life. By day, I played the exhausted, unsuspecting father. By night, I sat in the dark of my locked study, staring at 6 camera feeds, watching my daughter pacing the house, watching Malcolm snooping through our filing cabinets when he thought no one was looking. Then came the morning that almost broke me entirely. I woke up before dawn on the 4th day, my chest tight with a dread I couldn't shake. I went downstairs. The house was dead silent. I checked the outdoor thermometer. It was 42 degrees outside. The lake would be significantly colder. My father had a strict routine. He rowed on the lake every morning at 7 a.m. I threw on my coat and walked down to the boathouse at the water's edge. The sun was just starting to break over the ridge, turning the water into a mirror. I pulled open the heavy wooden doors of the boathouse. The old wooden rowboat sat on its rack. I flipped it over onto the dolly and crouched down to inspect it, running my hands along the hull. Everything felt normal until my fingers brushed the brass drain plug at the stern. It shifted. It was loose, not slightly unscrewed from wear and tear, but deliberately, heavily loosened, just enough that water would slowly seep in once the boat was 50 yards out. My heart hammered in my throat. I moved to the metal oarlocks. I gripped the left one and applied a small amount of pressure. Snap! The thick metal broke clean off in my hand. Someone had taken a metal file to the base of the oarlock, weakening it structurally. It looked perfectly intact, but the moment you put your body weight into a rowing stroke, it would snap. Without oars, you couldn't steer or row back. I dropped the broken metal and spun around to the wall, where the 4 bright orange life vests always hung. The hooks were empty. I scrambled around the boathouse in a panic and finally found them shoved deep inside, a sealed plastic storage bin in the far corner, buried under heavy tarps and rusted fishing nets. This wasn't a prank. This was a highly calculated, lethal trap. If my father had gotten into that boat, the drain plug would have flooded the hull. When he tried to row back, the oarlocks would have snapped, leaving him stranded. The boat would have sunk. In 45-degree water, hypothermia triggers shock within 3 minutes. He would have drowned, and the police would have labeled it a tragic accident involving an old man and an unmaintained boat. I stumbled out of the boathouse, gasping for air. My father was walking down the path, holding his coffee mug, ready for his morning row. "Morning, Adrian, beautiful day for it." I stood in his path, blocking the dock. "Dad, we can't use the boat today, why not?" "I checked it last week. It was fine." "It's not fine now," I said, my voice shaking uncontrollably. "Someone broke the oarlocks. The plug is loose. The life vests are hidden." He stared at me, the confusion slowly melting into a deeply unsettling realization. Who would do that? I looked up at the house, on the 2nd floor, standing perfectly still in the window of the guest bedroom. Was Vesper. She was watching us. She knew I had found the boat. She knew her plan had failed. Our eyes met across the vast lawn. For a terrifying 10 seconds, neither of us moved. Then she let the curtain fall and disappeared into the shadows of the house. I pulled out my phone and photographed the sabotaged boat. The loosened plug, the filed metal, the hidden vests, evidence. But as I walked my father back to the safety of the house, my blood ran cold with a terrifying certainty. They had tried poison. They had tried drowning. They were failing, which meant they were getting desperate. And desperate people don't stop. They escalate. The call from Harlan Pierce came while I was sitting in my truck outside the boathouse, my hands still shaking violently from the adrenaline. I had barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I vividly saw my father climbing into that sabotaged boat and sinking into the freezing, black water of the lake. I answered on the 2nd ring. "Harlan, Adrian, you need to come to my office in Denver immediately." Harlan's voice was devoid of its usual legal polish. It sounded raw, urgent. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that I absolutely refused to discuss it over an open phone line." "How soon can you get here?" I looked at the clock on my dashboard. It was 7:30 a.m. "I'm on my way." The 2-hour drive through the winding mountain passes gave me far too much time to think. I kept aggressively replaying the past 2 weeks. Vesper's sudden, highly suspicious return. My father's rapid, unnatural physical decline. The switched heart medication sitting in Dr. Brennan's safe. The expertly sabotaged boat. And Malcolm, smooth, charming, deeply observant Malcolm, who asked far too many questions about offshore accounts and knew far too much about complex pharmaceuticals. Whatever Harlan had dug up, I knew in my gut, it was going to be infinitely worse than I had originally imagined. Harlan's law firm sat on the 16th floor of a towering glass building in downtown Denver. He was waiting behind his massive oak desk when I was escorted in. A thick manila folder was spread wide open in front of him. He didn't stand up when I entered. He just gestured grimly to the leather chair opposite him. "Sit down, Adrian." He slid a stack of printed papers toward me. Malcolm Reed, 36 years old. He worked in high-level pharmaceutical sales in Chicago until 2 years ago, when he was abruptly fired. "Fired for what?" I asked, scanning the documents, falsifying massive sales records, forging the signatures of prominent doctors to push experimental drugs. The company chose not to press federal charges to avoid a massive public relations scandal, but he was completely blacklisted from the entire medical industry. Harlan flipped to the next page, tapping a red-circled number. But here is where it gets terrifying. Malcolm Reed currently owes $1.8 million. The astronomical number hung in the sterile air of the office. To a bank? No, gambling mostly, high-stakes underground poker and sports betting. He has been borrowing from highly illegal, underground sources to aggressively cover his losses. He specifically owes a man named Vincent Carver, who runs violent loan operations out of the 5 Points district. He is extremely dangerous. Carver breaks legs for $1,000, for almost $2 million. He puts people in the ground. I stared at Malcolm's smirking driver's license photo printed on the page. Okay, so Malcolm is desperate, correct? Harlan pulled out a second, much thicker set of documents. Now, let's talk about your daughter. I closed my eyes, bracing for the impact. How much? Harlan? $2.4 million. The air violently left my lungs. What? Casino debts in Vegas, private poker games in Denver, high-stakes tables. According to my investigators, she has been on an aggressive, spiraling losing streak for at least 4 years. He slid a heavily redacted bank statement across the desk. And here is the kicker, Adrian. She owes the exact same man, Vincent Carver. I stared blindly at the printed numbers, my brain trying to do the horrific math. $4.2 million total. When is their deadline? I asked, my voice barely above a dry whisper. According to intercepted communications my team acquired, Carver has given them 15 days. Maybe less. If they don't pay, they're dead. I thought about my father's vast estate, $12 million in highly liquid assets and property. According to his current will, it was split 50-50 between Vesper and me. $6 million each. $6 million wasn't enough to cover $4.2 million in debts and still leave them wealthy enough to disappear. But $12 million was. They're planning to take him out, I said slowly, the horrific reality crystallizing in my mind. And then me. Harlan nodded gravely. If your father dies, the estate gets split, $6 million each. But if you were to tragically die shortly after, with your current will leaving absolutely everything to Vesper as your sole heir, she would instantly inherit the full $12 million. It's more than enough to pay off Carver's syndicate, with millions left over to flee the country. Jesus Christ, I muttered, rubbing my face. Adrian, is your will updated? I wrote it 10 years ago after my divorce. Everything goes to Vesper. Harlan leaned forward, shoving a blank legal pad toward me. Change it today, right now. We are locking down your assets. 30 minutes later, I was violently signing a brand new last will and testament. In the event of my death, my portion of the estate would be divided between my father's charitable foundation and a local community land trust. Vesper would receive a one-time payout of exactly $100, explicitly stating she was legally acknowledged but intentionally disinherited. Signed, notarized, and legally filed in the state registry, Harlan said, stamping the documents. Financially, you are protected. Thank you, Harlan. He caught my arm as I stood up to leave. Adrian, you need to involve the police immediately. This isn't a family dispute anymore. This is a double homicide waiting to happen. Not yet. I said firmly, I have highly circumstantial evidence, a switched pill bottle, a broken boat, and a lot of debt. A good defense attorney would tear that apart in front of a jury. They would claim I tampered with the boat myself, out of paranoia. I need undeniable, bulletproof proof. I need them to confess on tape, or I need to catch them in the absolute act. Harlan looked at me for a long, terrifying moment. Be extremely careful, Adrian. These people are cornered, and cornered animals do terrible, unpredictable things. The drive back to the estate felt suffocating. By the time I reached the mountain roads, the sun was setting. My phone buzzed on the console. It was Vesper. Dad, where are you? Her voice was entirely casual, light. Malcolm and I made dinner. We're waiting for you. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles popped. I'll be home soon, sweetheart. Had a late meeting. After I hung up, I pulled the truck onto the shoulder of the road and opened the encrypted surveillance app TJ had installed on my phone. The camera feeds loaded slowly. Living room. Empty. Kitchen. Empty. Oswald's bedroom. My father was napping peacefully. My private study. 2 figures were frantically moving around my desk. I aggressively tapped the feed, enlarging it to full screen. Vesper and Malcolm. She was violently pulling open the heavy oak drawers, aggressively rifling through my confidential legal papers. Malcolm was methodically checking the locked filing cabinet in the corner. I turned up the volume on my phone. "The will has to be here somewhere," Vesper said, her voice tight, completely devoid of the sweet daughter persona she played downstairs. "Maybe he keeps it at his lawyer's office in a safety deposit box," Malcolm suggested. "No, he's incredibly old school. He doesn't trust digital files for important things. He'd want a hard physical copy here." She slammed a drawer shut with brutal force. "We have to know exactly what it says before we act." Malcolm straightened up, crossing his arms. "Listen to me. Once the old man is gone, we deal with Adrian next. Then it's all yours. $12 million. Clean and clear. Carver gets his cut, and we disappear to Costa Rica. What if Adrian suspects something? He's been acting weird since the boat." "He doesn't suspect a damn thing," Malcolm scoffed. "He's too busy playing the overly protective son. He thinks his dad is just getting clumsy." Malcolm lowered his voice, stepping closer to her. "2 more weeks. That's all the time Carver gave us. Then we stick strictly to the primary plan. The wine cellar, final attempt, day 13. I sat in the freezing cab of my truck, replaying the audio 3 times. The wine cellar, final attempt, day 13. Today was day 9. I had exactly 4 days before they escalated this to something I couldn't stop. When I finally pulled into the estate's driveway, the house was entirely dark except for the porch light. I walked inside, completely exhausted. Vesper was waiting for me in the foyer. She practically threw her arms around my neck. "Dad, you're home. I was getting so worried." For just a fraction of a second, she felt small in my arms, just like the little girl who used to run to me when she scraped her knee. I desperately wanted to believe that innocent girl was still inside her somewhere. But then she pulled back, smiling up at me, and I saw the cold, dead calculation in her eyes. The mask slipping perfectly back into place, I forced myself to smile back. "I'm fine. Honey, just a long day." The next morning, the deadly game of cat and mouse intensified. I had been sitting in my study since dawn, watching the camera feeds. My father's morning routine was remarkably consistent. Breakfast at 8, a slow walk around the property at 8:30, and tea in the sunroom at 9:30, where he would read the morning a paper. At exactly 9:15 a.m., I saw Vesper move into the kitchen. She filled the electric kettle, set it on the stove, and pulled down my father's favorite mug, the blue ceramic one with the chipped handle. She looked entirely normal, casual, like a loving granddaughter making tea for a man she cherished. Then she paused. She quickly glanced toward the hallway, checking over her shoulder. The kitchen was completely empty. Lily had gone into town for groceries. Malcolm was still asleep upstairs. My father was safely tucked away in the sunroom, waiting. Vesper quickly reached into her designer purse. My pulse violently spiked. She pulled out a small, unlabeled amber prescription bottle. She unscrewed the cap and tilted it into her palm. 2 large white pills dropped out. I leaned closer to the laptop screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. She set the pills on the granite counter, picked up a heavy metal spoon, and methodically crushed them, grinding them into a fine white powder. She quickly scraped the powder into the blue mug and stirred it round and round, completely dissolving the poison into the hot tea. She quickly rinsed the spoon in the sink, slipped the empty pill bottle back into her purse, and smiled. I was out of my chair and sprinting down the hallway before I even realized I was moving. I burst through the sunroom door just as Vesper was setting the silver tray down beside my father's armchair. He looked up, pleasantly surprised. "Adrian, you're up early." Vesper turned the teacup slightly in her hand. For half a second, her perfect smile faltered. Then it rapidly snapped back into place. "Morning, Dad. I was just bringing Grandpa his morning tea." I crossed the room, forcing my breathing to slow, forcing my hands to stop shaking. "Actually, Dad, wait, let me taste that first. I've been craving Earl Grey all morning." My father frowned, deeply confused. "You don't even like tea, Adrian. You're a coffee man." "I'm trying new things," I said, reaching firmly for the cup in Vesper's hand. She physically pulled it back slightly, her grip tightening on the porcelain. "Dad, this is Grandpa's special blend. It's too strong for you. Let me make you something else." "No," I held out my hand, palm up. "I want that one." We locked eyes, hers were wide. her pupils massively dilated with pure adrenaline. I saw the rapid calculation behind them, the absolute panic she was desperately trying to conceal. She couldn't refuse to hand it to me without raising massive suspicion. Slowly, her hands shaking slightly, she handed me the cup. "Suit yourself." I brought the hot porcelain to my lips and took a very small sip. It was bitter, floral, but underneath the Earl Grey was a distinct, heavily chalky aftertaste that absolutely did not belong. I walked casually over to the window, where a large potted fern sat on the sill, and I poured the entire contents of the cup directly into the soil. "You know what? You're right, way too bitter. Not my thing after all." I set the empty cup back on the tray and turned to Vesper, flashing a tight smile. "Why don't you go make a fresh pot, sweetheart? I'll keep Dad company." Her jaw tightened so hard I thought her teeth would crack. Then she smiled again. "Of course, be right back." She left the room, taking the tray with her. My father set down his newspaper, staring at me. "What the hell was that about, Adrian?" "Nothing, Dad. Just felt like tea." When Vesper returned with a fresh cup, I followed her directly into the kitchen, leaning against the counter while she worked. She couldn't add a damn thing to the new cup with me standing 3 feet away, watching her every move. The moment she was gone, I returned to the sunroom, scooped the soaked soil from the fern into a plastic Ziploc bag, and drove straight to Dr. Brennan's office. By late afternoon, we had the lab results. I sat across from Brennan. The toxicology report spread across his desk. "Diphenhydramine," Brennan said, tapping the paper with a pen. "Common name, Benadryl. But this was a massive concentrated dose. Combined with your father's heavily compromised heart medication, it would cause severe disorientation, extreme drowsiness, and a highly dangerous, rapid drop in blood pressure." "What would happen if he drank it?" I asked, feeling sick to my stomach. "Best case scenario, he violently passes out in his chair. Worst case, he tries to stand up, gets massively dizzy, and falls. At 82, a fall like that on hardwood floors or stone tiles could be catastrophic. Massive head trauma, a shattered hip, internal bleeding. And because of his age, the coroner would rule it a tragic, natural accident." Brennan leaned forward, his eyes burning with intensity. "This is the third time, Adrian. The medication, the boat, now the tea. You need to call the police right now." "Today it's not enough," I insisted, pacing the small office. "I need them to confess on tape. I need them caught in the act with absolutely no legal way out. They mentioned the wine cellar on the audio recordings. Day 13, that is 2 days from now. I am going to set a trap, Adrian. That is incredibly dangerous. I know, but I have 2 days to figure out what they built down there, and then we end this." I didn't have to wait 2 days to find out what was in the cellar. The next afternoon, Emma burst into my study, her face entirely pale, her breathing shallow. "Dad, there's something really weird in the wine cellar." I slammed my laptop shut. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "A big metal tank with weird tubes and a clock that's counting down." My blood ran completely cold. I grabbed Emma's hand and practically ran to the back hallway, Oswald following slowly behind us, leaning heavily on his cane. Emma led us down the steep, damp stone steps into the subterranean wine cellar. She pointed a trembling finger toward the west wall. I was looking for the old Christmas decorations behind the big shelf, and I leaned on it, and it moved. I approached the massive oak wine rack slowly and put my weight against it. It swung open effortlessly on freshly oiled, hidden hinges. Behind the rack was a cavity in the stone wall, newly lined with unpainted plywood. And inside that cavity sat an industrial-grade nitrogen tank. It was matte gray, standing about 4 feet tall, covered in hazardous warning labels. A heavy brass automated valve was mounted directly at the top, hardwired into a digital electronic timer. From the valve, clear rubber tubing snaked upward, disappearing into the ceiling above us. Emma tugged frantically on my sleeve. "Dad, what is it?" "Go upstairs, sweetheart," I commanded, my voice sharper than I intended. "Take Grandpa with you right now, lock the door to his bedroom." "But Dad..." "Emma, go!" She took Oswald's hand and led him up the stairs. I heard the heavy door click shut above me. I stood completely alone in the cellar, shining my phone's flashlight over the monstrous machine. My daughter had built this. She had constructed a fully automated execution chamber for her own grandfather. I followed the rubber tubing upward. It fed directly into the cellar's primary ventilation grate. I climbed onto a sturdy wine crate and examined the vent. The metal grill had been completely removed, the tubing inserted, and then the grill was screwed back into place. Someone had methodically applied clear, heavy-duty silicone sealant around the edges of the metal, completely sealing it shut. I sprinted to check the other 3 vents in the room. Same thing, sealed perfectly tight with silicone. The room was now entirely airtight. I climbed down and crouched beside the tank, studying the digital timer. The display glowed a faint, ominous green. It showed the scheduled activation time, 9:30 p.m. on March 13th. Tomorrow night, I pulled out my phone and obsessively photographed everything. The tank, the timer, the meticulously routed tubing, the completely sealed vents, every single angle I could manage. Nitrogen is a highly insidious gas. It is heavier than the ambient oxygen in the air. When that automated valve opened tomorrow night, the nitrogen would pour out of the ceiling vents, immediately sinking to the floor. It would slowly, silently fill the room from the bottom up, aggressively displacing the oxygen. You wouldn't smell it, you wouldn't taste it, you wouldn't even realize you were suffocating until it was far too late. You would simply feel a little tired, sit down, pass out, and die. In 8 to 10 minutes, this entire cellar would be a lethal nitrogen chamber. 10 minutes after that, whoever was trapped inside would be dead. The nitrogen would eventually dissipate harmlessly, leaving absolutely no chemical trace in the blood. Just an old man who tragically asphyxiated in a poorly ventilated cellar. The perfect crime. I checked my father's leather-bound desk calendar sitting on a small table in the corner. I flipped to tomorrow's date, March 13th. There, in the 9 p.m. slot, written in handwriting that definitely wasn't my father's. Wine selection with Vesper. I recognized the delicate cursive script immediately. It was Vesper's, the exact same handwriting I used to see on loving homemade birthday cards when she was 10. She had written it herself. She had personally scheduled her own grandfather's execution. I heard a car pull into the gravel driveway upstairs. Vesper and Malcolm were home. I moved with frantic speed, swinging the heavy oak wine rack perfectly back into place, ensuring everything looked completely untouched. I sprinted up the stone stairs, locked the cellar door behind me, and walked into the living room, just as Vesper walked through the front door. "Hey, Dad, everything okay?" she asked, carrying shopping bags, smiling radiantly. I forced myself to meet her cold, calculating eyes. "Fine. Just checking on some old bottles down in the cellar." Vesper's smile didn't waver, but something dark and terrifying flickered in her eyes. Suspicion, fear. "Well, don't forget you and Grandpa are supposed to pick out the wine for dinner tomorrow night." I wrote it in his calendar so he wouldn't forget. "I saw that," I said smoothly. "Looking forward to it." She turned and headed upstairs to her room. The absolute moment she was out of earshot, I walked into my study, closed the door, and locked it. I pulled up Harlan's contact on my phone and dialed. "Harlan, I need the direct cell number for Detective Morrison. The one we used in the corporate espionage cases. Adrian, what's happening? I have the proof, and tomorrow night I am ending this." The diner was entirely empty at 6:00 a.m., save for a tired waitress refilling coffee and a cook scraping the grill in the back. I had chosen the location deliberately. It was completely anonymous, halfway between Millbrook and Denver. Detective Rachel Morrison was already waiting in a corner booth by the window. She was in her late 30s, with piercing, observant eyes and short dark hair. She wore a heavy fleece jacket, trying to look off-duty, but her posture screamed law enforcement. "Mr. Holloway," she extended her hand. "Detective, thank you for meeting me." I slid into the booth and immediately opened my highly secured laptop, turning the screen toward her. "My daughter and her boyfriend are actively planning to murder my father tomorrow night. And I can finally prove it." For the next exhaustive hour, I walked her through absolutely everything. I started with the crushing financials, Vesper's massive gambling debts, Malcolm's highly suspect background, the terrifying connection to Vincent Carver's loan shark syndicate. $4.2 million in debt, Morrison summarized, her eyes narrowing as she read the files. And a $12 million estate on the line, highly motivated, Then I walked her through the timeline of the escalating attempts. I showed her the photos of the switched medication bottle and handed her Dr. Brennan's official toxicology report confirming the pseudoephedrine. I showed her the detailed photos of the expertly sabotaged boat, the loosened drain plug, and the cleanly filed oarlock. I opened the surveillance camera footage from the kitchen, forcing Morrison to watch silently as Vesper methodically crushed the lethal dose of Benadryl into my father's tea. Finally, I clicked to the most damning photos of all. The massive nitrogen tank filling the hidden cavity in the wine cellar. "This is currently sitting in my house," I said quietly, the rage burning in my chest. "An industrial nitrogen tank. The timer valve is explicitly set for 9:30 p.m. tomorrow night. The vents have been meticulously sealed, shut with silicone to prevent the gas from escaping. My daughter wrote an appointment in my father's calendar, inviting him down there at 9 p.m. Morrison was dead quiet for a long moment, staring at the photo of the glowing green timer. "This is incredibly sophisticated. The nitrogen displaces oxygen perfectly. No chemical residue in the lungs. No obvious signs of poisoning. It is almost the perfect crime. I know, that's why I need you. We have enough for a warrant, Adrian. We can raid the house right now and arrest them for conspiracy." "No." I slammed my hand on the table. "A good defense attorney will claim I planted the tank myself. They will claim I faked the T video. They will claim my father is senile. I need them to confess on a wire, completely unprompted, with police witnesses actively listening." Morrison studied me intently. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A full sting operation tomorrow night," I said, sliding a typed operational document across the table. "I will provide the location. I will wear a wire. You stage your tactical team outside. I will confront them in the cellar. When they think they have me trapped, they will talk. Malcolm is far too arrogant not to gloat. When I give the signal, you breach the doors and arrest them." Morrison exhaled slowly, rubbing her temples. "Mr. Holloway, you are asking me to let a civilian walk intentionally into an active homicide trap. This could instantly turn into a hostage situation. I am the one making this choice, detective, not you." I held her gaze, refusing to blink. "My father's life is on the line. I will not let them walk away on a legal technicality." Morrison was quiet, analyzing the tactical reality of the situation. Finally, she nodded. "All right, I'll coordinate my team. I need full blueprints of the property and complete access to those camera feeds. But understand this, Adrian. The exact second I hear a physical threat on that wire, my team is breaching that house with weapons drawn." "Understood." She paused, looking at me with genuine sympathy. "For what it's worth, I am incredibly sorry. No parent should ever have to do this to their own child." I didn't trust myself to speak. I just nodded, closed my laptop, and walked out into the freezing morning air. I had one single chance, one night to end this nightmare. Day 13 was coming at exactly 6 p.m. on day 13. My phone rang loudly. I answered it on speaker, so Vesper and Malcolm could hear. Dr. Brennan's voice was perfectly calm. "Adrian, your father needs to come in right away. I'm seeing some highly concerning irregularities in his latest blood work." From the corner of my eye, I saw Vesper lean forward eagerly. Malcolm's hand stilled on his coffee mug. "Of course, doctor," I said. "We'll be there in an hour." My father was already standing in the doorway, his coat on. Emma was beside him, clutching her backpack. She knew they were going somewhere safe. "We'll be fine," I told Vesper, keeping my voice level. "Enjoy your evening." As we drove away, I saw Vesper watching us from the window. She thought her plan was perfectly on schedule. I dropped my father and Emma off at Brennan's highly secured clinic in Denver. My father squeezed my hand before I left. "I raised you to stand up for what's right. Adrian, go finish this." By 8:15 p.m., I was parked a mile from the estate. Detective Morrison's voice crackled softly through the earpiece hidden in my ear. "We're in position, Adrian. Unmarked vehicles around the perimeter. If you feel threatened, say, 'Help me.' We breach immediately. Understood." I touched the small wire taped to my chest and drove the rest of the way to the house. When I walked through the front door, Vesper and Malcolm were drinking wine in the living room. They looked completely relaxed, the picture of innocent young love. "Hey, Dad," Vesper smiled. "How's Grandpa?" "They kept him overnight for observation," I said casually, walking past them toward the kitchen. I'm going down to the wine cellar. Need to grab a bottle to decompress. Vesper exchanged a rapid, terrified glance with Malcolm. I saw it all. I'll come with you, she said quickly, standing up. Malcolm followed close behind. Me too. I flipped the lights on as we descended the damp stone steps into the cellar. I walked straight to the west wall, stopping directly in front of the heavy oak wine rack that concealed the deadly trap. I turned to face them. What are you looking for, Dad? Vesper's voice trembled slightly. The truth, I said. I grabbed the edge of the oak rack and violently pulled it open. The industrial nitrogen tank sat exactly where they had left it. The green timer glowed ominously. Counting down to 9:30 p.m., Vesper froze in absolute horror. Malcolm's jaw clenched tight. Want to explain this? I asked, my voice echoing in the cold stone room. When neither of them spoke, I stepped closer, blocking the stairs. I know absolutely everything, the massive debts to Vincent Carver. $4.2 million between the two of you. I know you switched the medication, Vesper. I know you sabotaged the boat. And now you built a fully automated gas chamber to execute your own grandfather. Vesper's face completely crumpled. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Dad, please, you don't understand. I'm in trouble. If I don't pay Carver, he's going to kill me. Malcolm stepped forward, stepping protectively in front of her. It was my idea. She needed the money. Your father's estate is worth $12 million. An old man with a weak heart. Who the hell would question it? I did, I said, the fury radiating from my chest. Vesper sobbed, clutching her stomach. He's 82 years old, Dad. He's lived his whole life. Why does he get to sit on millions while I'm drowning in debt? I was just trying to survive. By murdering him, I shouted. And then what? Murdering me so you could get the whole $12 million. You traded your soul for cash, Vesper. Malcolm's hand slipped into his jacket pocket. Get out of the way. Adrian, we are leaving. You're not going anywhere. Malcolm pulled a heavy steel wrench from his coat. Move, help me, I said clearly, speaking directly into the wire on my chest. Before Malcolm could take a single step, the heavy cellar door at the top of the stairs burst open. Police, hands in the air right now. Detective Morrison charged down the stairs, her service weapon drawn, followed immediately by 3 tactical officers. Malcolm dropped the wrench instantly, raising his hands. Officer Porter slammed him against the stone wall, cuffing him brutally. Vesper stumbled backward, completely paralyzed by shock, as another officer cuffed her wrists. Dad, she screamed, thrashing against the officer's grip. Dad, please, don't let them take me. I stood there, tears finally burning in my eyes, watching my daughter get dragged up the stairs in handcuffs. The trap had worked. My father was safe, but as I stood alone in that cold cellar, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like my heart had been ripped out of my chest. The trial was swift and utterly merciless. District Attorney Elena Hartwell presented an ironclad case. The jury heard the audio recordings from the wine cellar. They saw the video of Vesper poisoning the tea. They listened to Dr. Brennan and Harlan Pierce completely dismantle the defense's pathetic claims of a misunderstanding. The jury deliberated for exactly 4 hours. Malcolm Reed was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, entirely ineligible for early parole. Vesper Holloway was found guilty of conspiracy and attempted murder. The judge, noting her extreme gambling addiction and lack of prior violent offenses, showed a sliver of mercy. She was sentenced to 18 years. As the gavel slammed down, Vesper collapsed into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably. As the bailiffs led her away, she looked back at me one last time, mouthing the words, "I'm sorry." I nodded because I was deeply sorry too, but sorry doesn't erase the terrifying consequences of your actions. 3 months later, I received a devastating letter from the Colorado Women's Correctional Facility. It was 3 handwritten pages, but the first line completely stopped my world from turning. Dad, I'm pregnant. I drove 2 hours to the prison the next day. Vesper sat on the other side of the thick plexiglass divider, looking impossibly small in her oversized uniform. Malcolm wants absolutely nothing to do with it, she cried into the phone receiver. The baby is due in February. Colorado law says she goes into the foster system immediately unless a family member takes custody. She pressed her hand against the cold glass. Dad, please. Take her. Give her the chance I never gave Grandpa. I looked at my broken, desperate daughter. The woman who had tried to kill my father was now begging me to save her child. I thought about my father, about the legacy of integrity and second chances he had built this family upon. I'll take her, I said quietly. On February 14th, in a heavily guarded room in the prison's medical wing, Margaret Grace Holloway was born. Vesper held her daughter for exactly 18 hours. She fed her, cried over her, and kissed her tiny forehead. When the social worker arrived with the final guardianship papers, Vesper signed them with shaking hands. She handed the baby to me, tears streaming down her face. Thank you for not giving up on me, Dad. You have 17 years left to figure out who you want to be. Vesper, I told her. Use them. We brought Maggie home to the estate, my father, frail but fiercely resilient, held his great-granddaughter with shaking hands. Emma, now 8 years old, appointed herself as the baby's primary protector, watching over her constantly. The house that had almost become a tomb was suddenly filled with the sounds of new life. Oswald Holloway passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 years later, at the age of 84. He died knowing his family was safe, knowing that the legacy he built would survive the darkness that had tried to consume it. Today, Emma and I are raising Maggie together. We sold the massive estate, placed the millions into a heavily protected trust for the girls, and bought a smaller, beautiful house near the lake. We visit Vesper twice a year. She is sober, taking accounting classes, and desperately trying to rebuild her shattered life from behind bars. Family betrayal is a terrifying thing. It happens when extreme desperation meets opportunity. But I learned that betrayal doesn't have to utterly destroy you. If you confront it with integrity, if you refuse to let the darkness win, it can refine you. We didn't just survive the nightmare Vesper created. We broke the cycle. We built a real family, forged not in greed or money, but in sacrifice, forgiveness, and the unbreakable promise of second chances. And as I watch Emma teach little Maggie how to row on the calm waters of the lake, I know that legacy is worth absolutely everything.